We are one episode away from the end of this volume of RWBY, which has definitely been my favorite volume so far. So I thought now would be a great time to talk about Lewis and Alex, what happened to RWBY, and where this is all going. My name is Deepcut, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive into it. The previous episode ended with RWBY deciding that she was ready to ascend, to go to the tree and become something else. While there, she meets a mysterious woman who appears to be an active agent for the tree, doing its will, but not necessarily being the tree itself in entirety. The entire episode essentially played the same story as the last one, which was building up an entire episode of asking whether or not RWBY would ascend into something else. This volume follows the gang into Ever After, which they knew as a fairy tale land from a book they knew as children called The Girl Who Fell Through the World. This book is a play on the Alice in Wonderland books of real life, but it uses the familiar Wonderland style instead to explore various spiritual schools of thought, particularly biblical. In Ever After, each being serves a purpose, and are often named after that purpose in some way. Together they maintain a balance for the tree, which Jean believes consumes the Ever After folk. The process of ascension often looks more like falling, as the most prominent example we saw until this week was the Red Prince, who in the Ever After story was originally a king. After losing to Alex, he would be demoted for not maintaining his duty of always winning. However, over the last few episodes, we saw a new approach to ascension present itself in the form of the Paper Pleasers. The Paper Pleasers are a particular community in Ever After that Jean decided to watch over during his time there. These star-shaped beings are made of paper, they love to help people, serving them really, and always try to beautify the place. Every day they risk the exact same dangers, however, because of how fragile they are, with a cyclical desire to damage themselves in water and light themselves on fire due to their inability to comprehend why these are bad ideas. Even when Jean gives them a seemingly good idea, like weighing themselves down with rocks so they can't be blown away by the wind, they quickly forget and need to be reminded. All of this makes the Paper Pleasers a sort of first form of life that is really only in a learning phase. While higher ever beings in Ever After have more strict duties, the Paper Pleasers are designed simply to learn the basics of how to help others and what dangers they will face. Because of this, they actually want to ascend, but they can't even do it in the magical way, as John kept the leaves of the tree away from the Paper Pleasers. Now, normally their deaths would probably lead to them coming back as Paper Pleasers a few times before ascending to a higher being, and that is okay. This process mirrors reincarnation, of which many schools of thought have humans as only living a small number of lives on Earth to learn the lessons necessary to become a bigger and better spiritual being. Without their cyclical deaths, the Paper Pleasers still did manage to grow and learn, but it got to the point where they needed to be allowed to die to face their final lessons before they could ascend into something higher. They came back as the Genial Gems, figures who are basically the same as the Paper Pleasers but with stronger gem-like bodies, ones that will allow them to live longer and do more of the things they want involving water and fire without destruction to their bodies. This means they are still at a learning stage more or less, but are finally ready to help the world in more serious ways. From here, the Genial Gems will still be destroyed, I think, and even if they are impervious, I imagine they will choose to ascend the way others do now that Jean isn't stopping them. From here, they may find more cycles like this that are just about learning and growing, but they may get more fine-tuned, becoming some of the creatures we see elsewhere with more specific duties in the hierarchy. This is just the latest in a series of stories involving Jean that are very biblical. The first story is of course Jean first landing in Ever After and pulling the time fruit that made him travel back to even before Alex and Lewis came to Ever After. In the story, Jean is a sort of Adam figure from the Garden of Eden, eating from the tree of forbidden knowledge of good and evil. In doing so, Jean traveled back in time and got to see the truth of the fairy tales he knew, understanding the darkness behind it by his interaction with Alex and her brother Lewis. The story of Lewis and Alex from Jean's perspective is similar to that of Cain and Abel, the sons of Adam and Eve. The two are siblings, and Jean believes Alex to have sacrificed her brother in order to return home, and write a version of a story that didn't include Lewis, the same way that Cain would end up killing Abel. However, in this episode, we got the story from the Curious Cat that Alex's brother Lewis was the one to return home, and Alex had a change of heart at the last minute, wanting to stay and fix the problems she had created in Ever After. Lewis would then go on to write the book of his time in Ever After, using his sister left behind as the protagonist. Even Lewis's name seems to be a reference to the author of the Alice in Wonderland books, Lewis Carroll. That would lead into the story of the Paper Pleasers, which was about Noah's Ark, but with something of a Gnostic twist. The paper pleasers are saved from their own destruction by Jean, who himself is something of a fallen angel with a Luciferian story. Jean has knowledge, so he tries to help, such as protecting the paper pleasers, but he doesn't understand the grand scheme of things and why the paper pleasers need to ascend. Lucifer is just one of many figures in the Lucifer tradition, some of whom, like Prometheus, are noted as having a love for humans instead of trying to trick them. With Jean, however, he eventually could not save the paper pleasers that the natural order seemed so desperate to wipe out, and he realized that they needed to be wiped out in order to come back stronger, in a form where he wouldn't need to watch over them. And now, with the paper pleasers becoming the genial gems, he can turn his attention back to Ruby, who has decided to ascend, and who could potentially come back as something bigger and better as well. The dark side of ascending is that it seems to take your memories away, as the curious cat indicates no one would need them. This is a reference to how you forget yourself in reincarnation, taking the growth with you into the next life, but not needing to hold on to the memories, which could often just weigh you down. For figures like the Red Prince, it has a tragic element to it, as if figures are being punished for making decisions they can't remember, always coming back and trying to get things right, but ascending into a lower state with each failure. Jean has learned, however, that he can't hold Ruby back, and that for better or for worse, Ascension is something that people sometimes just need. Perhaps Ruby will not come back lesser or higher, but instead she will just come back having let go of the things that were holding her down. The other characters have talked about the crushing weight they feel with the issues back in Remnant. No matter how hard they try, they are pushed into darker and darker circumstances. When Ruby is asked about her motives, she explains that she wanted to be a hero like the ones in the story her mother read her, and her mother and role models were all really heroes to begin with, huntresses. Back in Season 1, Ruby had such a positive and peppy attitude. She was almost the comic relief of her own show, but as she left school and the world fell apart, she's had to grow and make some real changes. What started as a legitimately naive young girl has had one of the most intense arcs across multiple volumes to become a girl who uses her past self as a sort of persona to keep others calm, to maintain that everything will be okay, but she no longer feels that this is the case. When the others are discussing their own growth, they note how other huntresses, no matter how great they were, still ended up losing, and when they lost, it was often the time that they died. Ruby has reached a growing point where she no longer wants to be a hero like the ones in the story, but she can still come back as something that is virtually the same, still just Ruby, but letting go of the idea of being a hero, and perhaps holding on to a new purpose of just trying to help, such as the paper pleases and genial gems are taught in their own Ascension. Thus, Ruby's mission becomes not about being a hero and not about trying to save everyone, and she can let go of the guilt that comes with not being able to, and be like the others, who are prepared to do just the best they can, even if it seems hopeless. Like the paper pleasers, I think Ruby will come back essentially the same, but in some ways stronger because of what she's learned from her various falls. In the end, Ascension isn't what makes a character grow or regress, but rather it's a tool they use to reshape themselves. When you are ready to reshape yourself into something bigger because you have that inside of you, it will look like a tool for growth, and when you need to let go of certain parts of you, it may look like you're just shrinking. But like I said, in the end, an Ascension can bring you back not much different than before. It's just a tool to help you shape your own growth. But what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time.